With MSI right round the corner, patch 14.8 could bring back some old favorites, reignited broken builds, and dethrone the queen of bot lane. But there are a shit ton of changes to get through, and not all of them are that impactful. So welcome to the things that are actually important about patch 14.8. Skarner is still right at the tip of people's tongues, so we should probably start with him. The top build we talked about last time was almost insta-hotfix because of how broken the W max was, and yet it still rounded out the cycle with a 52% win rate. And that's because of the Comet poke build top, which takes non-interactive trading to a whole new level. So this patch we've got nerfs to his mana constraint, lowering his base mana growth and regen, as well as the amount of mana it costs to cast his W, which will mean he'll need to be more selective when using the ability, and that he'll also need an early tier, both of which don't nerf him massively, but at least open the door for players to all-in him without being poked down beforehand. The other way Riot's trying to patch him out of top lane is to buff him in the jungle. Considering how sluggish it felt last patch, the cast time reduction to get the rock out of the ground is a great quality of life change for early skirmishes, and the 20% increased AD scaling on his Q gives him significant dueling power early. Kai'Sa's win rates have been suspiciously tame recently, so this new increase to her Q's bonus AD scalings should probably worry you. Even though it looks like an itsy bitsy 5% increase, in the context of her evolved Q, that's roughly equal to a 20% bonus AD scaling because it's applied on every missile. And that's going to work extremely well with Hail of Blades, Eclipse, and Manamune, given how fast they allow her to evolve her Q. This small Kai'Sa buff might actually change a bit of the surrounding meta as well. Jinx struggles a lot into Kai'Sa when isolated, meaning her prevalence might be toned down a bit. And in the jungle, Jarvan's entire kit synergizes perfectly with Kai'Sa's dive-oriented playstyle. Plus, almost all the current commonly played ADCs are essentially dashless, so with his increased clonking first auto buff Riot just gave him, he will once again further his solo Q strength. For top lane, there are only two real changes that matter: Ryze and Graves. Ryze was already on the cusp of being broken through the extremely efficient Roa Seraph's build, but increasing the slow on his W to 50% and reducing its rank 1 cooldown by 2 seconds could return us to the time where Ryze could turn off a champion's ability to move. It adds a huge amount of kiting power for him, which he can very easily abuse top lane. And with Graves, because the jungle is all about that one item power spike at the moment, he's kind of fallen off the map. So you might think to yourself that the buff to his crit multiplier and its interaction with Infinity Edge would be meaningless, but considering how hard most top laners find playing against his persistent range damage and wave clear, top Graves could genuinely become a really strong pick. Plus, one of the things people keep forgetting is that Graves is the only champion who can crit turrets, which makes it a double buff for top lane. Honestly, the jungle stays about the same this patch. Grubs spawn a minute sooner than before, big deal. Obviously, Skarner and Jarvan are on the rise, wow. And at the end of it all, none of the changes address the fact that Rek'Sai and Diana are the joint queens of jungle and will remain so. So let's just move on to mid lane. With MSI around the corner, it should come as no shock to anyone that Akali's getting a buff that makes her viable again. Even though having 30 more base health seems like nothing, what it really means is that she can sail through the first 5 levels of the game, which are historically her weakest points. She couldn't really be poked out of lane before anyway, thanks to Doran's shield and second wind, but this little buff technically increases the effectiveness of both and pretty much assures the early game is never going to be a problem for her. Leblanc is in the same MSI covered boat. With a cooldown reduction on her rank 1 W and an increase to the base damage on her Q, she's back to slapping you for half health at level 2, which is always so fun and interactive. There are also some small changes to pay attention to, like Hwei's buff to his passive and QQ, which adds a little bit more tussle to his kit, and Galio's been buffed for the 3rd time in a row, further playing into the dive narrative Riot's constructing for MSI. But the really interesting champion to talk about this patch is Taliyah mid. Taliyah falls into what we like to call a patchless meta. The last time she or the items she builds got changed was roughly 2 months ago, and yet she's kept a 54%-ish win rate since the start of the season. She's one of those champions whose win rate essentially scales with time, and here's why. As League has continued through the years, Riot has had to persistently innovate new champions so they feel fresh and exciting, which is why we keep getting kits with 10 abilities, 55 passive interactions, and descriptions the length of a small essay. On top of that, it seems as if the best form of League in Riot's eyes is a super fast-paced, action-packed game, and because that most often involves dashing around making high-octane plays, most new champions come with a dash. If we exclude supports, the last champion to be released without a dash, apart from the Skarner rework, was Set over 4 years years ago. There are now 125 different dash abilities, and more than half of the champs in the game have a dash of some kind, which means as long as AP items are functional, Taliyah is always going to have above average utility simply because of how incredibly strong her E is against dashes, which is incidentally why Poppy has a consistently high win rate as well, irrespective of her items or lack of changes. Moving bot, including Kai'Sa, the picture looks very anti-Jinx. Draven's new 5 bonus damage on his Q is essentially the same as giving him half a longsword at level 1, and his level of snowball can very easily take over the game if he gets one early kill, something which Jinx often struggles to keep up with. Skarner support is likely going to get more and more popular this patch as people start to discover how broken he is bot lane, and if you fancy playing that, I'll shamelessly plug to our most recent video about it, which you can watch to understand why it works. But if you do fancy trying it out, do yourself a favor and ban Soraka, since her silence cancels your E and makes the entire game semi-miserable. And the last real change to consider is Thresh. Thresh's degree of peel is fantastic for Jinx and excellent against Jarvan, meaning his base armor and MR growth stat increase further help to cement his constant worth this patch. And apart from that, there really aren't any other changes which you'll notice or need to care about. Bit of a quiet patch this cycle with a few interesting picks overall, but nothing too dramatic. So I thank you very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, but until next time, good luck and have fun.